Out in the far-flung dust lands of the American West, folks used to say a man's worth was measured by the strength of his horses and the size of his luck. But luck had never been too kind to Eli Mercer, the poorest rancher for miles around. While others boasted bloodline stallions with polished coats and proud pedigrees, Eli walked the auction pens with empty pockets and calloused hopes. And then came the day everyone remembered. A day that started as a joke to the whole town. Because Eli didn't walk away with a prized colt or a working mare. He picked up the one creature nobody wanted, a broken, feverish foal that could barely stand. People laughed. Some even said he'd lost his mind. What kind of rancher bets his future on a dying animal? But the West has a strange way of turning whispers into wonder. And what came next? Well, it carved Eli's name into the kind of legend you only hear in old saloons when the lamps burn low. This is the miracle no one saw coming. And you're watching it on MR West Legends. If you love true Wild West stories packed with grit, heart, and a touch of miracle, hit that like button and subscribe to MR West Legends. It helps us bring you more powerful stories from the frontier. And if this tale pulls you in, share it with someone who believes second chances can change everything. The sun had barely dragged itself over the ridge when the auction yard in Dry Hollow came alive with the usual Saturday noise. Hooves clattered on wooden boards, cowhands barked bids, and dust rose in thin golden sheets across the corral. It was the kind of morning when money talked loud, pride talked louder, and poor men like Eli Mercer usually kept their heads down. But Eli wasn't a man built for hiding, even if life had carved him leaner than most. His ranch, if you could call it that, sat 3 miles past the river bend, held together by patched fences, stubborn dreams, and one aging mare that limped more days than she walked. Folks didn't dislike Eli. They simply didn't expect much from him. In a place where bloodlines meant everything, a man with empty pockets tended to fade into the background. Still, he came to every auction. Maybe to remind himself he belonged, maybe to keep the hope of a fresh start alive. Even a poor rancher could imagine better days, especially when surrounded by fine horses, pawing the ground like living thunder. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the yard. Next up, we got a yearling Palomino colt, pure Brennan stock. Heads turned, saddles creaked. The Brennan brand carried weight. Cowboys straightened their hats. Ranch owners slid hands into deep pockets. Money always woke people up. But Eli didn't bother stepping forward. He knew how this went. Brennan blood could outrun the wind, and that kind of promise didn't come cheap. Soon enough, the colt sold for more than Eli made in a season. He let out a quiet breath and drifted toward the far end of the yard, where the animals that didn't draw crowds were kept. Every auction had a shadow corner. It was where lame geldings, half-trained ponies with bad tempers, and worn-out plow horses waited for whatever fate the bidders chose for them. And this time, something else waited there too. A small bay foal lay crumpled in the straw, ribs sharp as fence pickets, coat dull from fever. Its legs trembled each time it tried to lift its head. One eye stayed half-closed, swollen from an untreated infection. The poor thing looked more like a ghost of a horse than a living one. That one's a waste of time, someone muttered behind Eli. Should have been put down days ago. Owner dumped it on the auction to avoid the vet bill, another said. Won't fetch $1. Eli crouched beside the foal. The animal's breath rasped shallow and uneven, but its ear flicked faintly toward the sound of his boots. That tiny movement struck him harder than he expected. It was trying, still fighting, still reaching for life with whatever strength it had left. He gently brushed a hand over its neck. Hot, too hot, fever deep in the body, likely days old. But beneath the heat, he felt something else. A heartbeat steady enough to argue. When's it going up? Eli asked. A stable hand snorted. You want it? Auctioneer'll be relieved. He hates dragging out the pity cases. Most men would have walked away. Logic said the foal wouldn't survive the week. Money said it wasn't worth a dime. Pride said it was foolish to tie yourself to a dying animal. But none of that mattered to Eli. Not today. Something in that tremor of an ear, that stubborn heartbeat under his palm, called to him. Maybe because he knew what it felt like to be counted out, to be the one nobody believed in. The auctioneer cleared his throat and lifted the clipboard. All right, last one. Bay foal, not in good condition. Opening bid, $1. Silence. No one moved. Even the auctioneer's voice dipped with embarrassment. Eli raised his hand. $1. A ripple of laughter rolled through the yard. Mercer, you're kidding. Man can't even fix his fences. Now he wants a half-dead foal. That thing won't last till sundown. Eli didn't answer. He just stared at the foal, and the foal stared back with one clear eye, faint but steady. The hammer dropped. Sold. The crowd dispersed, still chuckling. Buying a dying foal wasn't just unusual. It was practically an announcement that a man had run out of common sense. But Eli didn't care. He slid his arms beneath the small body, surprised by how light it was, almost weightless. Bones and hope. That was all it felt like. Bones and hope.
He carried it toward his wagon while whispers chased him across the yard. He's lost it. What a fool. Poor guy. Some folks just don't know when to quit. But they didn't see what Eli saw. They didn't feel the feeble heartbeat strengthening when he lifted the foal. They didn't notice the barely there flick of its tail, like it was relieved to be touched with gentleness instead of neglect. He laid the foal in a bed of blankets and took a slow breath. The animal shook weakly, legs tucked tight, breath rattling. Easy, he murmured. You're going home now. The road back to his ranch was long, almost 3 miles of winding dirt and stubborn scrub brush. The wagon wheels groaned, the horse plodded in tired steps, and Eli kept glancing back at the foal. Every few minutes, he'd notice a tiny movement, the rise of its chest, a twitch in the ear. It was fighting. Maybe not enough yet, but fighting. As he drove, the land stretched out around him in endless ochre plains framed by mountains that looked carved from ancient bone. Dry Hollow wasn't a forgiving place. It swallowed the weak, rewarded the strong, and rarely offered second chances. Yet here he was, bringing home a creature that had already been written off by everyone else. At a narrow bend in the road, an old ranch wagon passed him. 2 men rode in it, both familiar faces from town. They slowed when they saw the foal lying in the back of Eli's wagon. Lord above, one of them said. That thing's still alive. Barely, the other said. Mercer, you're wasting time and feed. Eli kept his eyes forward. My time, my feet. The men shook their heads and rode on, muttering. When Eli finally reached his property, the foal gave a faint, strangled whinny, more breath than sound. It nearly startled him. That tiny spark of voice meant something. Maybe the little one still had embers left that just needed stirring. He carried the foal into the barn, laid it on fresh straw, and got to work. Water first. Cool, not cold. A cloth over the forehead to battle the fever. He mixed a mash of crushed oats and warm milk, hoping a few sips might stick. The foal didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't move much at all, but its eye followed him. And for Eli, that was enough to keep trying. Night fell. Coyotes howled in the distance. And inside the barn, under the dim glow of a lantern, Eli Mercer sat beside a broken creature that the West had already given up on. Yet something in the quiet convinced him this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. A story the folks in Dry Hollow would never forget. A story the West itself would whisper about for years. The night after Eli brought the foal home dragged on like a slow-moving storm. The barn felt colder than usual, as if the wind itself sensed the fragile life lying in the straw. Eli stayed awake beside the little bay, lantern flickering against the wooden beams. Every so often he'd place a hand on the foal's neck, checking for that faint pulse. Still there, still hanging on. By dawn, his eyes burned with exhaustion, but he refused to close them. Not when the foal's breathing dipped into worrying pauses. Not when fever made its skin radiate heat like a coal left too long in the fire. Hour after hour, he cleaned the swollen eye, dabbed cool cloths over its face, whispered gentle encouragements that seemed to calm the trembling. He wasn't sure if the foal understood a thing he said, but it didn't matter. What mattered was presence. Quiet, steady presence. Maybe that's what the ranch had needed all along. Not more cattle, not bigger barns, just someone who wouldn't quit. At sunrise, the barn door creaked open and a sliver of warm light cut across the straw. The foal stirred for the first time in hours. Its head lifted slightly, wobbling like it weighed too much for its neck. Eli leaned in, surprised. "Well now," he murmured, "look who decided to greet the morning." The foal blinked. Both eyes, even the infected one, fought to open halfway. That alone felt like a small victory. And on a ranch held together by scraps and stubbornness, small victories meant everything. Eli dipped a cup into a bucket of lukewarm water and held it to the foal's lips. Nothing at first, then a twitch, barely noticeable. The foal's tongue flicked out, tasting the water. It wasn't drinking, just testing. But for Eli, that spark of instinct was enough to shake loose a breath he'd been holding all night. "You're still in there," he whispered. "Good. I was hoping you'd stick around." He stayed with it until the sun rose fully. The ranch outside looked the same as it always did. Weathered fences, fields in need of clearing, the tool shed leaning a little farther to the left with each passing season. But somehow, the place felt different this morning. Not better, not magically fixed, just less empty. By mid-morning, Eli stepped inside the small cabin he called home and heated a pot of water. He mixed it with powdered milk he usually saved for emergencies. If this wasn't an emergency, nothing was. He poured the warm mix into a bottle and carried it back to the barn. The foal lay curled, breathing steadier now, though still far from strong. "Let's try this again," Eli said softly. He eased the bottle's tip near the foal's mouth. This time, the reaction came quicker, a small nudge, a weak suckle. Only a sip or two, but it was enough to lift Eli's spirits in a way he hadn't felt in years. Persistence. That was all this place had ever given him, and now he'd give it right back. As the morning passed, Eli cleaned the stall, brushing away old straw and replacing it with fresh bedding. He swept the entire barn as if expecting company. Maybe he didn't want the foal waking up in a world that looked forgotten. Around midday, the foal managed to lift its head again, this time with a hint of purpose. Its ears twitched toward the sound of Eli's voice as he hummed an old tune his mother used to sing while she mucked stalls. The foal's eye brightened a little. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough for a flicker of hope to land in Eli's ribcage again. "Let's see what you're made of, little fighter," he said. "I reckon you've got more gumption than anyone gave you credit for." He hadn't planned to say it out loud, but the words came naturally. "Maybe we both do." By afternoon, a wagon rattled its way toward the ranch. Eli recognized the driver even before the dust settled. Mrs. Avery from the small supply store in town. A woman with sharp eyes, quick judgments, and a soft spot for strays of all kinds, though she'd never admit that part. She climbed down from her wagon with a small bag and a look that mixed curiosity with mild disappointment. "Heard you bought yourself a dying foal," she said bluntly. The news traveled faster than the wind in Dry Hollow. Eli didn't bother pretending he was surprised. "It's got more life in it than folks think," he said. Mrs. Avery arched a brow. "Does it?" She peered into the stall, lips tightening the moment she saw the little bay curled in the straw. "Oh dear," she muttered. "You really know how to pick him, Mercer." Eli crossed his arms. "It deserves a chance." She didn't argue. That alone told him she didn't think he was as foolish as the rest of town claimed. She handed him the small bag. Inside were herbs, powdered supplements, and a vial of something that smelled like mint and dirt. "Steep the herbs, mix with warm water, give small amounts every few hours," she instructed. "Might bring the fever down, might not, but it's better than waiting around." Eli nodded with quiet gratitude. She didn't need to help him. Nobody did. But kindness sometimes arrived in the West in strange, quiet ways. Mrs. Avery glanced at the foal one last time. "Most men would have walked away, Mercer." Most men ain't me. Her stern expression softened, almost into a smile. No, they're not. She climbed back in her wagon and rattled off, leaving Eli staring after her, unsure whether her visit meant Dry Hollow thought he'd lost his mind, or if someone out there thought he might just prove everyone wrong. He spent the rest of the day tending the foal with the herbs and supplements. The fever didn't break, not yet, but the foal's breathing steadied, no longer as ragged. When Eli brushed its coat, it didn't flinch as much, and by late afternoon, the foal shifted its weight enough to almost lift its chest off the ground. Eli froze, waited, watched with breath held. The foal didn't manage to rise fully, but the attempt alone was a milestone. A spark of determination ran through the small creature like a flicker of heat beneath ashes. "You're tougher than you look," Eli whispered. "Maybe tougher than me." As twilight settled over the ranch, Eli sat in the doorway of the barn, watching the sky turn shades of tangerine and rose. He looked back at the foal, whose eyes followed him with quiet trust. Trust. It was a dangerous thing out here, but the foal had given it freely, and in return, Eli made a promise. Not out loud, just a solid, silent vow that formed in his chest like a steel hook. He would not let this foal die, not while he still had breath to fight for it. He didn't know it yet, but this was the start of a bond the West hadn't seen in a long time. A bond built not on pedigree or profit, but on sheer will and the kind of hope that refuses to die in the dirt. A bond that would soon carry them both much farther than either could imagine. By the time a week had passed, the foal was no longer the limp, fever-stricken creature Eli had carried from the auction yard. It still trembled when it stood. Its ribs still pressed sharp against its skin, but it stood, and in Dry Hollow, standing was half the battle. The fever had broken late one night, slipping away as quietly as a thief after taking nothing worth keeping. Eli had fallen asleep with his back against the barn wall, and when he woke, he found the foal nudging the empty bottle at his side, hungry and impatient. A sound escaped him before he could catch it. A laugh. A simple, startled laugh that felt like cracking open a window in a house that had been sealed too long. From that morning on, everything shifted. The ranch didn't look different in the daylight, but felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. The wind didn't sound as lonely. And the foal, weak-legged as it still was, brought motion back into the old barn. Tentative steps, soft snorts, the kind of life Eli hadn't seen on the property since before his father passed. He named the foal Dusty, not because it was plain, but because it seemed to rise out of nothing, defying the dirt that tried to hold it down. Dusty took to walking slowly, wobbling on its thin legs, using Eli's shoulder as a crutch more often than not. Some days were better than others. Some days the foal refused to stand at all, exhausted from the progress it had made the day before. Eli didn't push. Healing had its own pace, and he wasn't about to rush a creature that had spent most of its life fighting to survive. Still, the two of them found a rhythm. Bottle feedings, short walks, rest, then more rest, and long, patient hours. Outside the ranch, the gossip grew thicker than smoke. Mercer's wasting his time. Saw that foal. Still looks half dead. Man should have invested in a mule. At least that'd be useful. If Eli heard any of it, and he did, he kept his thoughts to himself. People in Dry Hollow were quick with judgment and slow with apologies, and he'd lived here long enough to know that proving them wrong was sweeter than any argument. By the third week, Dusty had more energy than Eli expected. The foal followed him around the barn like a loyal shadow, bumping into buckets, tripping over its own legs, occasionally crashing into Eli's back as if to say, "Still here, still trying." One morning, after feeding, Eli opened the barn doors to let the early sun spill across the floor. Dusty lifted its head, ears forward. "You want to step outside?" Eli asked. The foal didn't understand the words, but it understood the moment. Its legs wobbled with determination. Eli steadied it with a hand. Together, they walked into the bright air. Dusty froze as sunlight washed its coat. Its whole body seemed to hum, like the warmth was reviving something long dormant. Then it took a few steps, shaky at first, more confident the second time. Eli watched with a tightness in his throat. He'd seen strong horses stumble. He'd seen prize colts give up. But Dusty kept trying, even when the effort scraped every ounce of strength it had. "Good," Eli whispered. "That's it. That's the way." The foal lifted its tail with a flick that carried more attitude than health. Eli had a laugh again. Stubbornness was a good sign, a sign of future fight. Over the next several days, those small steps became longer walks around the ranch. Dusty leaned on Eli less and moved with something that almost resembled rhythm. Its eye infection cleared under Eli's careful cleaning, revealing two bright, alert eyes that missed nothing. Not a rustling branch, not a passing bird, not the way Eli's mood shifted with the day. Horses had a strange sense for heartbeats. Dusty seemed to read Eli's like a map. One afternoon, a group of townspeople rode past the ranch on their way to the river crossing. Dusty was grazing in the yard, skinny but upright, and they slowed their horses when they saw it. "Well, I'll be," one man muttered. "That foal's not dead yet. Mercer must be pouring miracles into that bottle." "Still not worth the trouble," another said. "Colt like that'll never run right, never work cattle, never amount to much." Eli stood at the fence, listening quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't boast. He just rested his arms over the rail and said, "Time will tell." They shook their heads and rode off. Dusty lifted its head, ears bristling as if offended. "Don't worry about them," Eli said, rubbing the foal's neck. "Some folks only see what's right in front of them. They ain't got eyes for what can be." Dusty nudged his shirt like it agreed. As the foal grew stronger, Eli began introducing simple exercises. Nothing heavy, just enough to build muscle where bone and weakness had once ruled. First came walking in small circles, then lifting its legs over ground poles, then trotting, barely a trot at first, more like an awkward scamper. But each day, Dusty grew a little faster, a little bolder, a little more sure-footed. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Eli led Dusty to the small practice pen behind the barn. The foal pawed the dirt, restless, as if sensing something new. "Let's try a little run," Eli said softly. "Just a short one." He stepped back. Dusty hesitated. Then, without warning, the foal bolted. It wasn't fast, not by any measure, but it was running, really running for the first time. Its hooves kicked up dust. Its legs moved in a choppy, uneven rhythm. But there was heart in every stride. Heart bigger than its body. Heart stronger than the doubt that clung to it from the day it was born. Eli watched, stunned, as emotion tightened his chest. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't fooling himself. Dusty had speed in those spindly legs. Not yet refined, not yet powerful, but there, a raw spark waiting to be shaped. The foal slowed, panting, sides heaving. Eli rushed to its side, bracing it. Dusty leaned against him, exhausted but bright-eyed, as though it had just discovered a truth about itself the world refused to believe. "That's it," Eli whispered. "That's what they don't see." And that night, as he finished brushing Dusty's coat, Eli felt something deep inside him shift. Not hope. Hope he'd had before. This was belief. A firm, unshakable belief that Dusty had something special tucked inside those fragile bones. Something no one else would have noticed. Something the West itself seemed to recognize, even if the town didn't. By the next morning, the training routines were more structured. Dusty walked with a purpose now. Its steps held rhythm. Its eyes held fire. And Eli wasn't the only one who noticed. From the ridge above the ranch, a rider watched with interest. Word had spread farther than Eli realized, and rumors about the crazy rancher with the miracle foal were beginning to stir curiosity. Eli didn't see the rider, didn't hear the hoofbeats slip away. He only saw Dusty, moving with a determination that made the world around them fade. The doubts of the town no longer mattered. The limitations of the past no longer had a hold. Dusty was rising, and Eli was rising with him. Together, they were stepping into a chapter neither of them could imagine. The chapter where the whole West would soon witness something extraordinary. The desert was quieter than prayer when the sun rose over Red Mesa. No wind, no rustle, only the long shadow of a man standing alone against a dying horizon. Jonah Wade, once a rancher with more land than he could ever fence, looked now like a man carved out of the same dust that clung to his boots. His ranch was gone, his herd scattered, and the one horse that had stayed with him, a gaunt chestnut he called Mercy, stood trembling at his side, ribs showing like warped boards on an old barn. Jonah placed a weathered hand on her neck. "We ain't done," he muttered, half to her, half to the windless morning. Not yet. The previous year had been a season of ruin. Rustlers took his cattle. Drought burned his land. His brother vanished in a card game gone wrong. Folks in town whispered that Jonah Wade was finished, a ghost waiting to fade. But Jonah believed a man could come back from anything as long as he still drew breath. The test came when he heard talk of a government contract offering a handsome reward for anyone able to drive supplies from the border up through the Devil's Basin. Half the men who tried never returned. Outlaws owned that pass. The basin held heat like an oven. No water for miles. No mercy for those who slipped. But Jonah needed the money, needed the pride even more. So he signed the contract. The official at the depot eyed him skeptically. "You're taking that horse." Jonah tightened Mercy's reins. "She's taken me through worse. Not sure anything's worse than Devil's Basin." "Well," Jonah said calmly, "we'll find out." The journey began at dusk, a wagon hitched with crates of ammunition, food, and medicine. The path demanded precision. Travel at night to avoid the blistering sun. Rest by day in slivers of shade if you could find any. Jonah rationed the water, giving Mercy more than he gave himself. By the third night, the desert changed. The wind howled with the voices of men long buried beneath the sands. Jonah kept the lantern low. Every sound, every grind of a wheel, every soft grunt for Mercy echoed through the basin like a signal to whoever might be listening. At the fourth ridge, they appeared, for riders drifting out of the dark like wolves slipping out of brush. No lanterns, no greeting, just the cold glint of iron. Jonah reined Mercy to a halt, hands loose, breathing steady. "Evening," the lead rider said, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek like a lightning strike. "Devil's Basin ain't safe for travelers." Jonah kept his voice even. "Ain't safe for thieves neither." The scarred rider grinned. "We'll decide that after we take a look at what you're carrying." Jonah knew talking would buy seconds at most. He shifted his weight, watching Mercy's ears flick. She sensed danger before he did. Her trembling stopped. Her stance hardened. The gunfight erupted in the dark. Jonah dropped from the saddle and rolled behind the wagon while his bullets kicked dirt into the air. The lantern shattered. Darkness swallowed everything. He fired 3 shots at the muzzle flashes. Mercy screamed and lunged, knocking one rider clean off his horse. Jonah moved fast, reloading by touch, counting breaths. The outlaws circled. He heard the scrape of boots. He turned and fired. One man fell. Another cursed and vanished into the dark. The scarred rider wasn't done. He charged, firing wildly. Jonah ducked behind the wagon again, but the outlaw leapt over it like a madman, tackling him into the dirt. They grappled, fists slamming, dust choking them both. The outlaw pulled a knife from his boot, raising it high. Before he could strike, Mercy barreled into him, hooves pounding the earth. The knife spun away. Jonah grabbed the outlaw's collar, slammed him down, and finished the fight with a single blow. The basin fell silent again. Jonah sat in the dirt, chest heaving. Mercy collapsed beside him, shaking with exhaustion. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Easy, girl. You saved us." By dawn, the bodies were buried under cairns of stone. Jonah didn't bother to mark which stone belonged to which outlaw. Some men didn't earn names in the ground. The final stretch through Devil's Basin was the hardest. Water gone. Food nearly gone. Mercy's steps slowed. Jonah walked beside her, supporting her shoulder with his own as if she were another man, not horse. When the supply post finally appeared on the horizon, its silhouette rising like a fortress in the heat haze, Jonah almost didn't trust his eyes. He dropped the reins and laughed, a rough, broken sound. Mercy nickered softly. The soldiers at the post rushed out to meet him. "We thought you were dead. Nobody makes it through the basin alone." Jonah helped Mercy toward the trough. "Didn't come alone," he said. The commanding officer inspected the wagon, then whistled low. "Contract fulfilled. Payment in full." Jonah accepted the envelope but stared at Mercy instead. The officer noticed her condition. She needs rest, feed, a doctor. She'll get all that, Jonah replied. He stayed 2 days at the post. Mercy received water, medicine, and rest under a shaded awning. Jonah spent the hours repairing her tack, mending her blankets, and rubbing salve into her hooves. He didn't sleep much. Didn't need to. Watching Mercy recover was rest enough. On the third morning, as the sun stretched orange across the hills, the officer approached Jonah. "You've got grit," he said. "If you need work, we've always got more routes." Jonah shook his hand. "I'll think on it." He mounted Mercy slowly, giving her neck a gentle pat. Her coat looked healthier already, her eyes clearer. They started back across the desert, but this time the horizon didn't feel like a wall closing in. It felt like a door opening. Jonah Wade had gone into the basin a broken rancher with nothing left but a starving horse and a stubborn will. He came out a man reborn, riding an animal that refused to die when death was the easier choice. Some said the desert takes more than it gives. Jonah disagreed. Sometimes the desert strips a man down just to show him what he's made of. And sometimes, if he's lucky, it gives him the one companion he needs to stand back up. Jonah glanced at Mercy. "We're not done," he whispered. "Not even close."